Boy, what a good-looking group.
That's what we're known for here, the most attractive audiences in town. We are getting up close and personal with you today, Wayne Newton. Thank you for being here.
Well, I am honored and to be up close and personal with you and this wonderful audience is a thrill. Thank you.
So we have two big things happening in your life. First of all, you've got a brand new show in Las Vegas at Bally's called Up Close and Personal, which is a new kind of show for you.
Right.
And also, you have opened up your legendary home and estate, Casa de Shenandoah, to the public for the first time.
Yes, as a matter of fact, it's 52 acres, and it has 8 homes on it, 65 head of Arabian horses.
I can't wait to talk to you about that.
Monkeys, penguins, wallabies, all peacocks, you name it, it's there.
Well, I have seen a ton of pictures. I have not yet gotten to visit. But what I'm most impressed about is that this 52-acre legendary resort, or estate, I guess you'd call it, you actually bought 5 acres at a time. Isn't that true?
That is true. In fact, it wasn't 5 acres at a time even. I started with 5 acres and built a home for my parents and my brother and myself.
And how long ago was that?
We started in 1968. I was just 2 years old.
When you bought that 5 acres?
And when I bought that 5 acres, and I built the first house, my brother got married and moved to Beverly Hills. Then when I got married the first time, I've only been married twice. I thought I'd clear that up quickly because my wife is watching also. And I built a home for my parents close to that. And then when that marriage went its way, my parents said, can we move back to the ranch? And I said, of course. And so thank God they lived there until they both passed away. And so I know they're up there listening to every word I say right now.
Now be careful.
Yes.
And so the ranch has grown, and you have built everything from those houses that you mentioned to a zoo, an exotic animal.
Some of the houses as the property became available, contiguous to that 5 acres, I was able to purchase those. Some of them were acre lots with just maybe a trailer house on it or an old log cabin kind of thing. And so I said to the people that owned the property at the time, look, I don't really necessarily want your home, so you can live here until you decide to move on, or in some instances they passed on. I then tore the house down and the property became part of the Shenandoah. So it has been a work in progress from the beginning. Literally.
I think it's so lovely that you, even in buying the property, allowed the residents to stay there.
Well, they were very happy, and they got a chance to see some of the stuff that was going on where I built, I think, the first house for my parents. I don't think I know. I built the first house for my parents and myself and my brother, which is a 32 square foot home, 3,200 square foot home. And the next thing I built was my barn, 4 stalls, because my love in life were horses and music, and I couldn't decide which I loved more, but I could tell you which afforded the other.
Right. Well, both started early in your life. From what I understand, you started performing at age 6?
Actually, I started at the age 4.
Oh.
I am from Virginia originally, and I'm half Native American, a quarter Irish, and a quarter German, which means I can't drink at all. And so I developed bronchial asthma, and but I had a local radio show before going to school.
I think maybe did you start that at age 6?
Yes, I did.
That's where I got that number.
And the doctors said to my parents, well, in order for this child to live, you're going to have to get him out of this climate. So they took about 3 or 4 months to decide. I'm kidding, Mom and Dad. And we moved to Phoenix, Arizona because of the weather. And my brother and I auditioned for a talent contest there, and thank God we won that. And the owner of the station then decided that my brother and I should have our own local television show from the age 9 until 15. And I went to Las Vegas at 15 and auditioned at the Fremont Hotel downtown. And we did 6 shows a night, 6 nights a week for 5 years.
I was going to ask you about how many shows a day you were doing, because I read a statistic that said you've performed something like more than 35,000 times in Vegas alone. Right. And I started doing the math about how many shows a year that would have to be, and it seemed impossible.
Well, it does seem impossible, and I think the irony of it for me is that nobody told us it was difficult. And so we didn't go into that knowing what to expect. We just got hit with it. And so it worked for me because you can't sing that much. I don't care who you are. 6 shows a night, 6 nights a week for 5 years. So I kept developing musical instruments in order to give myself vocal relief. And I had lots of time to practice on stage.
And entirely self-taught, is that correct?
I'm sorry?
You were entirely self-taught on all of
Yes,
those instruments?
I do not read a note of music. I play 13 different instruments and can't read a note.
Can you name all 13?
I can if I have to. And you'll notice I didn't say how well I play them, but I do play 13. I've never truly picked up an instrument that I couldn't get a melody out of.
Wow.
And except in the beginning, things like the trumpet, where you have to build the embouchure, the muscle in your lip, or saxophone, kind of the same thing. It takes a certain amount of time to get that working in the right way.
Well, that's just mechanics, but the music was in you.
The music was in me.
Yeah, and it still is.
Well, and I hope it will be the rest of my life, because I think other than my family and friends and being home in Las Vegas, the happiest I am is when I'm on stage. And I can see the happiness that maybe my music is bringing some of the people.
Well, it's clearly brought happiness to probably, I could say, hundreds of thousands of people around the world over the course of your legendary career.
Well, thank you.
I want to know, first of all, what's different about this new show and why you came back now, because you took a few years off.
I took a few years off simply because I had worked my entire life. And my wife kept saying, I want to go here and I want to go there. She loved small towns. And so I took her to Henderson, which is right outside of Vegas. And and my daughter said, I want to see the Atlantic Ocean, because when she was here last, she was too young to remember. And so I took her out to Lake Mead and threw some salt in and said, this is kind of what it's like. But then we decided to open the ranch, and I didn't realize all of the loops that we would have to go through in terms of getting permits and making sure that the sprinklers were in and the walkways were available for patients that needed wheelchairs or couldn't, navigate that kind of terrain. And so it's 52 acres, and it's kind of a work in progress to this day. It is a working ranch, and we have lots of animals. We have geese that fly in wild. We have had many, many different kinds of birds, because the ranch also consists of, and everybody, including myself, is worried about the watering, problem that we're having in this country with the great amount of throughout the Southwest, most particularly. And we have artesian wells on the property. So
it's almost like magic.
It is magic, and it's a very wonderful place, because when you come inside the gates, you don't know where you are. You could be in Connecticut, you could be in New York, you could be anywhere. And it is so different, I think, from what people imagine the desert to be like. Because if you can get water to that soil, you can grow anything. So we have weeping willow trees, we have palm trees, of course, but all kinds of flowers and those kind of things.
Is it true that you found the wells on the property because you were going to dig a garage that like went underground and then you just hit water?
You have really done your homework, Abby. When I built the main house on the ranch, I decided that I wanted to have an underground garage. And so we could drive in one end and take an elevator up to the main floors of the house. And then when we left, go back down, get in the car, drive out the other end. We went down 10 feet and hit water.
All I can say is, knowing what I know about your car collection, I'm really glad that you hit the water before you got those cars underground.
So am I. So am I.
How many cars do you have on your property? How many do you own?
Well, how many we own, I would guess probably around 20. But I have a collection of cars that I'm very proud of because they all mean something to me personally versus just saying, oh, I like that car, I think I'll.
Yeah, it's more like, I like this car because it was a gift from Elvis.
I have Steve McQueen's Rolls Royce. I have Johnny Cash's Rolls Royce. I have Bill Harrah's Rolls Royce. I have a 1933 Essex Terraplane, and I have a 1934 Bentley that was one of two made. And I found it in London. I was appearing there. It was the first time that they had devalued the English pound. And so I thought, well, we're not going to go home with what we thought we were, so why don't I try and find something I can invest in? Mm-hmm. And I found this car in a garage, and it belonged to a widow, and her husband had bought it, and it was one of two made because in 1934, the racing craze hit Europe, and Rolls Royces and Bentleys were known as snails. Slow, big cars, right? And so Bentley decided to build two racing cars, and this was the only one.
Literally two.
Two, just two.
Wow.
So it's the only one left. The other one was wrecked.
And so when I come to buy a ticket to go on the tour, how many of these cars will I get to drive?
Well, I will take you for a ride in any car that you wish, but in terms of driving, do you drive a standard transmission?
Of course I do. Well, I won't hold you to it. What about the horses? How many of those do I get to ride?
You can ride any horse that is broken to ride. An Arab horse is a different breed of horse from a thoroughbred or a quarter horse in that they mature much slower, but they live much longer. And so you don't break or breed an Arabian horse until they're 3, as opposed to quarter horses and thoroughbreds.
And your love for horses also goes back to your childhood, right?
I think it probably goes back to my heritage. Being half Indian, horses have always been my great love. And I have a connection with horses that even veterinarians have said, if I didn't see this, I wouldn't believe it. I've had mares that refused to have their babies unless I was there.
You're like a midwife.
Well, yes. Well, maybe a veterinarian assistant instead of a midwife. I probably couldn't pass the physical for the midwife,
I don't know if this is an urban legend, but I heard that when you were a small boy, you sold your bicycle to buy your first horse.
That's true. I sold my bicycle, and then I got $10 for it, and I collected pop bottles up and down the alleys of Phoenix to pay the other $10, because in those days you could get 2 cents for every pop bottle that you turned in. And I then found my second horse, and without...
Wait, you bought a horse for $20?
$20. And that was about $10 overpriced.
Did you just show up at your parents' house and be like, can I keep him?
It was worse than that. It was worse than that. I also bought a second horse, and I found out that the gentleman who was selling it was a big camera fan, and so without my parents knowing, I confiscated their movie camera, their 8mm movie camera, and I gave it to him for the horse. Then I had to go home and tell my parents that I couldn't afford to feed them, the horses, and what could I do to help out? Because my dad was an auto mechanic, and my mother was a housewife, which is the hardest work, as you ladies know, in the world. Even
Yeah, especially when your kid's coming home with horses.
And I tried never to lie to them. I just didn't tell them the whole truth.
So how did you end up feeding the horses?
Well, my parents were very kind, and they realized my penchant for horses, and so they were able to scrape up enough money to feed the horses, and those were my two horses to start with. I didn't really know the look I was looking for in a horse until I realized and saw my first Arabian horse, and they are truly a work of art. They're just magnificent. And their long suit, the thing that they are bred to do, is be endurance horses. And so that's why they do so well in the desert climate or in snow or in mountains or that kind of thing. And so we were just named, and this is not bragging. This is just, I am so very proud to have followed my love of the breed of the Arabian horse. We were just listed as one of the top 2 breeders of Arabian horses in the world.
Congratulations.
And,
well, time is flying by, and we actually only have a few more minutes left together, but so I want to get back to the show. Up Close and Personal with Wayne Newton at Bally's.
right?
What makes this show different than the other shows that you've legendarily performed throughout your career in Las Vegas?
Well, actually, I'll be performing those shows also, not at Bally's, but I wrote a show when Bally's asked me to come back and entertain again, which I was very thrilled to do. I decided to write a show that was reminiscent of Las Vegas when I went there. At the age of 15, we were a city of maybe 70,000 people. There
As
were
opposed to what is it now?
2.5 million. And there were 7 hotels on the Strip only. And I had worked in the lounges, which were up close and personal. And I was flashed on stage.
Tell me more
And of
about
course,
that.
that's when my voice started to change. And, we had people die in the audience.
Oh my gosh.
And in one
And
instance,
this is the environment you wanted to recreate?
well, my wife said, "Is that when you got the reputation for killing your audience?"
Oh, yeah.
The truth of the matter is that they took the gentleman out of the room, out of this very intimate room that seated maybe 250 people, 300 people, and they were looking for ID so they could notify his family. Couldn't find any, so they wrapped him in a carpet and put him backstage. So we had to step over him to get on stage to do the show, and step over him coming off. So I've actually had 2 people die in the audience over the years.
Well, when you do 35,000 shows, I suppose just it's
If
destined
it could
to
happen, it does,
right?
yes.
And you are actually involving through stories and through some special effects some of the Vegas legends that came before you.
Well, actually, with the writing of this show, usually I work for the audience's understanding. I work with probably 28 musicians on stage, 3 singers, and the show is gangbusters from the time it opens till it closes. And I realized that when I opened in Vegas, it was a much different world. People could ask you for the request. If they had a question, they could ask you the question. And the performers that were legendary in Las Vegas, like Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and Sammy Davis and Elvis and Bobby Darin and on and on and on, were quite an age difference than I was because I started so young there.
Right.
And they kind of took me and put me under their wing to make sure I didn't show up at their parties because they thought that might lead me down the wrong path. And they wanted to make sure I survived because my contemporaries were the Beatles and Rolling Stones and those people. And they wanted to make sure that doing the kind of music I was doing and having the love for that kind of music would carry on their tradition. And so they kind of took me under their wing and made sure I behaved myself. So I was never in any kind of problem with the police or any of that kind of thing because I was just plain working too hard.
That's great. Well, I would love to come out to Vegas to see the show. I hope that everyone who's watching at home will travel and see
We
you
would
in
love
Vegas.
to have you anytime you're out there. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions from the audience.
Okay, absolutely. Some questions from the audience.
Here we go.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
I was wondering what it was like working with Lucille Ball. I saw an episode, I have an episode where you're singing to a cow.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I sung to a lot of cows in my life. No, four-legged cows. Now, this is a good group.
The best.
Let me tell you a story about Lucy, and I'll try and keep it short, but it gives you an insight to the kind of wonderful human being she was. I had done that show you're talking about, and it was very well accepted. And the network and Lucy said, we should do a series around Wayne and that character on television with the cows and the chickens and all of that. And Lucy said, and we'll produce it with Desilu. And I said, got it. I mean, that was the thrill of a lifetime. That was the break that I had been looking for. And so the CBS people came up and they said, absolutely, this is a go. And so about a week later, I'm at the Flamingo in Las Vegas, and I get a call from Lucy. And she said, Wayne, I need to talk to you. So my husband and I are coming up. Will you meet us in the dressing room? I said, of course. And so she said, I haven't been able to sleep. And she said, I'll tell you why. And I will do this with you because when I tell the story, it's because people ask for it in Vegas. I will do this with you, and you will get an idea of what I'm talking about. She said, the reason I haven't been able to sleep, and I'm thinking, what could be the problem? And she said, I'm going to give you one name. And she said, I want your immediate and total reaction to that name. And I said, okay. And she said, Jim Neighbors, what is your first reaction? Gomer Pyle. And that was exactly why she couldn't sleep. She said, if I allow you to do this show, she said, you will be stuck with that image the rest of your life. And she said, I know that it means a lot to you financially. It means a lot to Desilu financially. But if I were you and I wanted to do other things and other kinds of music, I'd turn this show down because you will be typecast the rest of your life. And I did turn it down, and that's the kind of human being she was.
Wow. What a wonderful story. Thank you. Do we have another question?
Hi, Wayne. Thank you
Hi
for
there.
being here. What would you say is your most impressive accomplishment that you've done in your career?
Oh my goodness, I would have to say surviving it to date is fairly substantial. However, I would have to say that if I had to name one thing that I'm the most proud of, it would be my involvement with the USO in entertaining our men and women in the armed forces. I have had the great honor and privilege of entertaining our men and women in every major confrontation our country has been in since Vietnam, and I was there twice. And I feel like that if I have been given any talent by the great man upstairs or the great woman upstairs, if I've been given any talent at all, it was best used to entertain those people who are giving us a way of life that we wouldn't have without them.
Do we have another question?
Hi, it's an honor to be here with you today. I actually
Thank you.
had the great fortune to visit the Casa de Shenandoah
did
in
you?
March. Yeah, and I absolutely loved it.
Thank you.
At first, I was like, wow. Like, I did the tour that included the downstairs. It's like $50. I was like, well, that's a lot of money, but I'm really, I'm really happy I did it. It was, as you described, it is sort of an oasis in the desert. It was really amazing. Actually, you kind of touched upon in the last question, but I remember going through the amazing collection of artifacts and, you know, hearing your description about it. You know, the gold Arabian horse that went to the moon with the astronauts, the amazing car collection, you know, gifts like the microphone from Frank Sinatra and so forth. But I was very touched when you talked about if you could only save one thing. It was a gift that a World War II POW gave you and made in I think it was a Japanese camp. And you kind of touched on it a bit about, you know, why you love the soldiers and why you give so much back and so forth. And I was wondering, like, where does that sort of love come from? Is there something in your family background? Were there like a military background, or were you touched by any particular stories?
I think that, I know I was touched, and I don't know why. I took military school for 4 years, and I thought that I wanted to be in the military. And came time, it was during the Vietnam era, that there was a draft in effect. And when you turned 18, you showed up for the draft, you know, and they put you through all the things that you guys know about, or some of you might know about. And having had bronchial asthma, the sergeant looked at my papers and he stamped it and he said, "You can go." And I said, "Go where?" He said, "Home." I said, "Home?" And I looked at my papers and it said 1Y. And I said to him, "What does 1Y mean? I know what 4F is, but what does 1Y mean?" And he said, "It means that the Russians would have to be in the lobby before we called you." And I went back to Lake Tahoe, which is where I was appearing, and I walked on stage, and it was the Marine Corps' birthday that night, and the Marine Corps had bought out the entire showroom. So it was a sea of blue and white uniforms. And it hit me like a ton of brick. I thought, okay, they can stop me from fighting for my country, but they can't stop me from singing for my country. So I came off stage and I said to my brother and my manager, "I'm going to Vietnam. And you don't have to go. I understand if you don't want to go, but I'm going." And so I went, and I did shows through the years with Mr. Hope, domestically only. And we became very dear friends. And when I went to Vietnam, I came home, and I'd been home about maybe 2 weeks, and I see where Mr. Hope was then going to Vietnam. And I went to Korea, and I get home, and I see where Mr. Hope was then going to Korea. So the next time we were together domestically, I said to Mr. Hope, "Can I ask you a question?" And he said, "Sure, Wayne." I said, "Why doesn't the Department of Defense send us both at the same time? Because I would love to work with you overseas for our men and women in uniform." And he looked at me, and this is the God's honest truth, and I would not call God to witness a lie, okay? He said to me, "You're not too bright, are you?" And I said, well, no, sir, I'm not, but I don't do press conferences about it, you know. And,
You're doing one right now.
and he said, listen, Wayne, he said, just think of it. He said, since time immemorial, anytime our country has been in peril and in war or anything like that, since the beginning, he said, the first thing we do is send out an Indian scout.
Whoa.
And he said, if he comes back, it's okay for the rest of us to go. And so when Mr. Hope became too ill to travel and do his shows overseas, he and the USO called me and asked if I would take over as chairman of the Celebrity Circle and continue his work, which we have done for the last 20 years.
Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
We have another question.
Ronnie Wright, celebrity photographer in New York. I would like to say, when I was younger, my mother and father let us stay up late to watch Johnny Carson. When you came on and the Temptations came on and the Supremes came on, me and my sisters got up, we watched you. I appreciate you, thank you. You made it, man.
God bless you. Thank you very, very much.
Isn't that the best kind of question from the audience? Where all they do is tell you how great you are. We have time for one more.
Hi, Wayne.
Hi there.
Did Jay Leno ever approach you about buying any of your cars?
Jay has an incredible collection, which most people are aware of. He never wanted to buy any of my cars because actually my cars are a little different than Jay's collection or people who just like cars and they keep collecting them. Mine have to have, for me, they have to have some particular meaning. So every time I look at them, Johnny Carson was a dear friend. Steve McQueen I was a big fan of. Bill Hara gave me work when I was 16 at Harrah's Club in Tahoe and Vegas and all of that. And every time I look at one of those cars, it brings back wonderful memories for me versus just the car representing something that might be ostentatious or something that a guy just says, oh, I think I want a car like that. I've never been like that. They had to represent something that touched my heart, and my collection does that.
Does that mean you'll never sell to anyone?
I think there's a good statement there, and I have no plans, nor will I ever. Now, when I'm gone, I'm sure that members of my family don't have the same appreciation for those items.
Well, I don't see you showing any signs of slowing down.
No, when people say to me, do you ever think about retiring? Not a prayer. Not a prayer. There's something about looking at the faces of you that does my heart good. It gives me a reason to wake up in the morning. And if I can bring a little bit of happiness into a world that's pretty troubled right now, then I'll feel like my existence is justified.
Well, I can't think of a better place to leave it. Thank you for all the joy that you've brought to us. We're all going to come see you in Vegas, both at Casa de Shenandoah and at your new show at Bally's.
It's a deal. And I
Thank you,
thank
Wayne
you for
Newton.
your kindness and your